Imagine writing down every problem in your life. Bills, family conflict, stress at work, people judging you. Now imagine counting them. 1, 10, 30, 83 problems. A farmer once did exactly that. He traveled far to ask the Buddha for help, but the Buddha said something strange. You don't suffer because of the 83 problems. You suffer because of the 84th. The farmer stared at him. Because he had no idea what the 84th problem was. Long ago, in a quiet village surrounded by fields and dusty roads, a tired farmer began a journey he hoped would finally end his suffering. For years, his life had felt like a battle. The weather ruined his crops. His wife complained every night. His children ignored his advice. And the neighbors spoke about him behind his back. Each day seemed to bring a new problem. One evening, overwhelmed and exhausted, the farmer sat down and did something unusual. He decided to count them. Not just a few problems, all of them. The bad harvests. The arguments at home, the gossip in the village, the money he never seemed to have enough of. He counted carefully, one problem after another. When he finally finished, the number surprised even him. 83 problems. The farmer stared at the list. 83 things standing between him and peace. That night he made a decision. If anyone in the world could help him solve these problems, it had to be the Buddha. So the next morning, before the sun rose over the fields, he began walking. Miles of dusty road, hours under the hot sky, all for one question. When the farmer finally arrived, he bowed deeply and poured out his heart. I have 83 problems, he said. I came because I heard you are a wise man. Please help me solve them. The Buddha listened quietly, not interrupting, not judging. When the farmer finished speaking, the Buddha looked at him calmly and said something completely unexpected. I cannot solve your 83 problems. The farmer felt anger rising in his chest. Was this the wisdom he had walked miles to hear? But the Buddha continued. There is only one problem you need to solve. The 84th. The farmer frowned. Because he had counted carefully, and he was certain of one thing, there were only 83. So he asked the question that would soon change his life. What is the 84th problem? But the Buddha did not answer immediately. And at that moment, the farmer had no idea that the real problem in his life had never been the 83 he carried with him. Before the farmer ever met the Buddha, his life looked ordinary from the outside. He lived in a small house at the edge of the village, surrounded by narrow fields of dry soil. Every morning before sunrise, he walked into those fields carrying the same quiet hope. Maybe today would be a good day. Maybe the weather would be kind. Maybe the crops would finally grow the way he needed them to. But hope, he had learned, was a fragile thing. Some years the rain never came. Other years, the storms came too strong. And every time the harvest failed, a new problem appeared. Less food, less money, more worry. But the farm was only the beginning. At home, life wasn't much easier. His wife was not a cruel woman, but she was tired. Tired of the uncertainty, tired of the constant struggle. And when people grow tired of problems, they often start looking for someone to blame. Some nights she complained about the farm. Other nights she complained about him. You should work harder. You should plan better. You should have listened to my brother. The farmer rarely argued back. But each word stayed with him. Then there were the children. When they were young, they listened carefully to everything he said, but as they grew older, something changed. They ignored his advice. They questioned his decisions. Sometimes they even laughed at his worries, and each time it happened, the farmer felt something small break inside him. But what troubled him the most wasn't the weather, the arguments, or even the money. It was the feeling that no matter how hard he tried, life kept adding new problems. Fix the fence, and the roof would leak. Repair the roof, and the crops would fail. Solve one issue, and another one would appear, always, without fail. Over the years, the farmer slowly built a belief in his mind, a very simple belief. If I can just solve all these problems, then finally my life will be peaceful. He imagined a day when the farm worked perfectly, a day when his wife stopped complaining, a day when his children respected him, a day when the village spoke kindly about his family, a day with no problems. But there was one thing the farmer never noticed. Something quiet, something hidden. No matter how many problems he solved, the list never became empty. In fact, it seemed to grow longer every year, and that was exactly why he had begun counting them. Because somewhere deep inside, he believed that if he could finally remove the last problem, peace would finally begin. But what the farmer didn't know yet was that he had already misunderstood something about life, something that would soon be revealed. And when the Buddha finally explained it, the farmer would realize that the problem he feared the most was not on his list of 83. For many years, the farmer believed life was a simple equation. If he worked harder, if he became wiser, if he made fewer mistakes, then slowly, one by one, his problems would disappear. So he tried. He truly tried. When the crops struggled, he woke up earlier. Before the sky turned light, he was already walking through the fields, checking the soil, pulling weeds, repairing broken tools. If I work harder, he told himself, this problem will disappear. Sometimes it worked. One season the harvest improved. For a moment he felt relief, but the relief never lasted long. Because when the crops grew better, the market price suddenly dropped. The next year he tried a different strategy. He planted new seeds. He listened to advice from other farmers. He changed the way he watered the land. Again, for a short time, things seemed better, but then something else went wrong. A disease spread through the plants. Half the harvest was gone. The farmer began noticing something strange. Every time he solved one problem, another one appeared. fixed the irrigation system. Then the ox became sick, helped the ox recover. Then a storm destroyed the fence, repair the fence. Then the roof started leaking again. It felt like life was playing a game with him. And no matter how hard he tried, the game never ended. At home, the pressure only grew stronger. His wife saw the struggles and became more frustrated. "You always say things will improve," she said one night, "but nothing ever changes." The words cut deeper than she realized. Because the farmer was beginning to fear the same thing. What if she was right? What if life was simply a chain of endless problems? Still, he refused to give up. He told himself something many people quietly believe. If I can just solve a few more problems, then life will finally become peaceful. So he kept chasing solutions, faster, harder, more desperately, but something strange kept happening. The closer he thought he was to fixing everything, the more complicated life seemed to become, almost as if the problems were multiplying. One evening, after a particularly long day, the farmer sat outside his house watching the sky grow dark. He felt exhausted, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And for the first time in his life, a terrifying thought crossed his mind. What if the problems never stop? The thought scared him so much that he pushed it away immediately. Because if that were true, then everything he believed about happiness would be wrong. But deep down, a quiet doubt had already begun growing inside him, and that doubt would soon lead him to make a decision. A decision that would change everything, because somewhere far away, people were saying that a wise man lived nearby, a man who understood suffering, a man who understood life, the Buddha. And the farmer began to wonder something he had never asked before. What if he knows how to end all these problems? But the farmer had no idea that the answer waiting for him would not remove his problems at all. In fact, it would reveal something far more unsettling. The year everything collapsed began like any other. The farmer woke before sunrise, walked through the quiet fields, checked the soil with careful hands. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe this might finally be a good season. The rain had come at the right time. The crops were growing stronger than they had in years. For the first time in a long while, hope returned. But hope can be dangerous when it arrives too early, because sometimes it only makes the fall harder. One afternoon, dark clouds rolled across the sky. At first, the farmer welcomed them. Rain meant life for the crops, but the wind grew stronger and stronger. Within minutes, the sky turned violent. The storm didn't bring gentle rain. It brought destruction. Heavy winds tore through the fields. Young plants bent and snapped. Water flooded the soil, and the farmer could do nothing but stand there, helpless, watching months of work disappear. By the time the storm passed, half the harvest was gone. That night, the house felt heavier than usual. His wife saw the damaged crops and shook her head. "I told you this would happen," she said quietly. "You should have prepared better." The farmer said nothing. Not because he agreed, but because he was too tired to argue. Later that evening, his oldest son spoke up. "If farming is always this hard," the boy said, "why don't we just leave?" The words echoed in the small room. Leave. The farmer felt something twist inside his chest. This land had belonged to his family for generations. It was not just soil, it was identity. But now even his children doubted it. That night, long after everyone else had fallen asleep, the farmer stepped outside. The sky was clear again. The storm had already moved on, as if nothing had happened. But the damage remained. He sat on the wooden step outside his house and stared at the empty darkness of the fields. For years he had believed that if he worked hard enough, if he planned carefully enough, he could slowly remove the problems from his life. But now that belief felt broken. Because no matter how hard he tried, something always went wrong. Always. For the first time, the farmer felt something deeper than frustration. He felt defeat, real defeat. And in that quiet moment, a painful realization appeared in his mind. What if my entire life will always be like this? What if the problems never end? The thought was unbearable. So he searched for another possibility, another answer. And then he remembered something he had heard months earlier. Travelers passing through the village had spoken about a man who understood suffering better than anyone else. A man people called the Buddha. They said people traveled long distances to ask him questions about life, questions about pain, questions about peace. And suddenly the farmer felt a small spark of hope. If anyone could explain why life felt like this, it would be him. So before sunrise the next morning, the farmer packed a small bag, stepped onto the dusty road, and began walking. He did not know how long the journey would take. But he carried one simple hope in his heart. Maybe the Buddha could finally show him how to end his problems. But what he was about to hear would challenge everything he believed about happiness. After hours of walking under the hot sun, the farmer finally reached the place where the Buddha was staying. It was quieter than he expected. No grand buildings, no large crowds, just a few trees, soft wind moving through the leaves, and people sitting peacefully nearby. For a moment, the farmer hesitated. The calmness of the place felt strange to him. His life had not felt calm for many years, but he had walked too far to turn back now, so he stepped forward. And when he finally stood before the Buddha, he bowed deeply and sat down. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The Buddha simply looked at him with patient eyes. And somehow, that silence made the farmer feel even more nervous. Finally, the words poured out. "I have many problems," the farmer said quickly. "My crops fail because of the weather. My wife complains. My children don't listen. The neighbors talk badly about me." He took a deep breath. "I try to fix these things, but every time I solve one problem, Another appears. The Buddha nodded gently. The farmer continued speaking, almost desperately now. So I counted them, he said. All the problems in my life. There are 83. He leaned forward slightly. I came here because people say you are wise. Please help me solve them. The Buddha remained quiet for a moment. Then he spoke calmly. I cannot solve your 83 problems. The words landed like a stone. The farmer blinked in disbelief. What? He said. His voice grew sharper. People say you understand suffering. They say you help people. And yet you tell me you cannot help me? The Buddha did not react to the anger. Instead, he asked a simple question. Do you believe that once these 83 problems disappear, you will finally be happy? The farmer answered immediately. Of course. Who wouldn't be? If the farm works, my family stops arguing and people stop speaking badly about me, life would finally be peaceful. The Buddha looked at him carefully. Then he said something strange. Everyone in this world has 83 problems. The farmer frowned. What do you mean? The Buddha continued calmly. A farmer has problems with weather and crops. A merchant has problems with money and trade. A king has problems with power and enemies. No matter who you are, problems follow you. The farmer felt frustration rising again. Then what is the point of wisdom? He asked. If problems are everywhere, what can anyone do? The Buddha smiled slightly. There is one problem you can solve. The farmer leaned forward. What problem? The Buddha answered slowly. The 84th. The farmer felt confusion wash over him. 84th? I counted carefully. There are only 83. The Buddha shook his head gently. No, there is always one more. The farmer stared at him, trying to understand. What is it? He asked. What is the 84th problem? For a moment, the Buddha said nothing. Then he finally explained. The 84th problem is the belief that life should have no problems at all. The farmer sat completely still, because for the first time he realized something strange. That belief had been guiding his entire life, but he still didn't fully understand what the Buddha meant. And what the Buddha explained next would force the farmer to look at his life in a completely different way. The farmer sat quietly, trying to understand what the Buddha had just said. The 84th problem is the belief that life should have no problems. The words sounded simple, but the meaning felt confusing. The farmer frowned. But everyone wants that, he said. Everyone wants a life without problems. The Buddha nodded. Yes, he replied gently, and that is exactly why so many people suffer. The farmer looked down at the ground. For years he had believed that peace would come after he solved everything. After the farm worked perfectly, after the family stopped arguing, after the village respected him, only then he thought. Would life feel calm? But now the Buddha was saying something very different. The Buddha picked up a small stick and slowly drew a circle in the dirt. "Look at life," he said. "Problems appear. You try to solve them. Sometimes you succeed, and sometimes you fail." The farmer nodded slowly. That part felt familiar, but the Buddha continued. "And when one problem disappears, another one usually arrives." The farmer gave a quiet sigh. That part felt painfully familiar too. "But the suffering," the Buddha said softly, "does not come from the problems themselves. It comes from your resistance to them." The farmer looked up. "Resistance?" The Buddha nodded. "You believe life should be different. You believe the rain should always come at the right time. You believe people should always behave kindly. You believe your plans should always work. But life does not follow those rules." The farmer thought about the storm that destroyed his crops. He thought about his wife's complaints. He thought about his son questioning the farm. All those moments had filled him with anger and frustration. Because deep down, he believed those things should not happen. The Buddha pointed to the circle he had drawn. "Imagine a life where problems continue to appear. The weather changes. People disagree. Plans fail. New challenges arrive." The farmer nodded again. That sounded exactly like his life. But then the Buddha added something unexpected. "Now imagine you stop expecting life to be problem-free." The farmer blinked. "Stop expecting that?" The Buddha smiled gently. "Yes. You still work. You still solve problems. But you no longer believe life must be perfect. You no longer fight reality itself." The farmer felt something strange happen inside his mind. For years he had been fighting every problem as if it were proof that life was going wrong. But what if problems were simply part of life? What if the real struggle had not been the 83 problems, but his demand that they should not exist? The thought felt unsettling, but also strangely relieving. Because if the Buddha was right, then the farmer had been chasing something impossible his entire life, a world without problems. And suddenly he began to wonder something he had never asked before. If I stop fighting the 83 problems, will my suffering finally disappear? But the answer to that question would take time for the farmer to fully understand. And what he would discover next would change the way he looked at every problem in his life. The farmer did not immediately understand the Buddha's words. In fact, as he walked away later that day, his mind felt even more crowded than before. 83 problems, and now an 84th. But this one was different. This one wasn't about crops, money, or family. It was about the way he looked at life itself. On the long walk back toward his village, the farmer began noticing things he had never paid attention to before. Along the road, he passed a merchant arguing with a customer. Further ahead, a traveler complained loudly about the heat, and near the river, two fishermen shouted at each other over a tangled net. Problems everywhere. Before meeting the Buddha, the farmer would have thought something simple. Those people must be unlucky. But now another thought appeared in his mind. Maybe this is normal. Maybe everyone carries their own 83 problems. As he continued walking, the farmer suddenly remembered something the Buddha had said. A king has problems with power. A merchant has problems with money. A farmer has problems with weather. The roles were different. But the pattern was the same. No life was free of problems, not even the lives that seemed perfect from the outside. For the first time, the farmer began seeing something clearly. The real suffering in his life had not come from the rain, the storms, or the arguments. It had come from something quieter, something he had believed for years. The belief that one day, life would finally stop giving him problems, and suddenly the truth appeared in his mind like a clear sky after a storm. That day would never come. Not for him. Not for anyone. Because life itself was always moving, always changing, always creating new challenges. The farmer stopped walking for a moment and looked out across the open fields. For years he had believed peace would begin after the last problem disappeared, but now he saw something different. Peace did not come from removing all the problems. Peace came from removing the expectation that life should be problem-free. And in that moment, the farmer finally understood the Buddha's words. The 84th problem was the demand for a perfect life, a life with no storms. No disagreements, no failures, no uncertainty. But such a life had never existed. Not for farmers, not for merchants, not for kings, not even for the Buddha. And once the farmer saw that truth clearly, something inside him became lighter, because the impossible burden he had been carrying for years was finally beginning to fall away. But the most surprising change had not happened yet, because when the farmer returned home, he would discover something unexpected. The 83 problems were still there, but somehow they no longer felt the same. When the farmer finally returned to his village, very little had changed. The fields were still damaged from the storm. The fence still needed repair. And inside the small house, his family was still living the same complicated life as before. The 83 problems were still there. But something inside the farmer was different. The next morning, he walked out to the fields just as he always had. The soil was still uneven, the crops were still struggling, yet for the first time in many years, his mind felt quieter. Before meeting the Buddha, every problem had felt like proof that life was failing. If the weather was bad, he felt angry. If someone criticized him, he felt wounded. If plans collapsed, he felt defeated. Because deep inside, he believed life was supposed to be easier than this. But now that belief was gone. The problems were still there. But the invisible pressure had disappeared, the pressure to make life perfect. The pressure to remove every difficulty. The pressure to control everything. Later that evening, when his wife complained about the damaged crops, the farmer simply listened. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He just nodded and said calmly, "We will deal with it." And strangely, the words felt true, not because the problem was small, but because he no longer expected a life without them. Days passed. New problems appeared just as they always had. A tool broke. The market price dropped again, and the roof began leaking during the next rain. But each time something went wrong, the farmer noticed something surprising. His suffering did not grow the way it once had, because the 84th problem was gone. He no longer demanded a life with no problems. He simply lived the life he had, working, fixing what he could, accepting what he could not, and somewhere between those two things, a quiet kind of peace appeared, the kind of peace he had spent years chasing. The kind of peace that had never come from solving 83 problems, but from finally letting go of the 84th. If you could remove one expectation from your life today, what would it be? Before this story ends, think about your own life for a moment. Most of us spend years trying to solve every problem, trying to fix every difficulty, trying to make life finally become calm. But what if the Buddha was right? What if peace doesn't come from solving every problem, but from letting go of the expectation that life should have none? So here is a simple question for you. If you could remove one expectation from your life today, what would it be? Write it in the comments. Maybe it's the expectation that people should always understand you. Maybe it's the expectation that life should always be fair, or maybe it's the expectation that you should never struggle. Whatever it is, leave it in the comments. Sometimes the first step to peace is simply recognizing the 84th problem. And remember something important. The farmer never removed his 83 problems. The weather still changed. People still disagreed. Life still brought challenges. But once the 84th problem disappeared, the 83 stopped controlling his happiness. And the same might be true for you. Because the next time life gives you a problem, you may remember something most people never realize. The problem itself might not be the real source of suffering. The expectation behind it might be. And sometimes, letting go of that expectation is the moment peace finally begins.